Hello, I'm Dr. Steve Hotsy, founder and CEO of the Hotsy Health and Wellness Center in Houston, Texas. The so-called COVID-19 vaccine is not a vaccine at all. It's a dangerous experimental gene therapy. The Center for Disease Control, the CDC, gives the definition of the term vaccine on its website. A vaccine is a product that stimulates a person's immune system to produce immunity to a specific disease. Immunity is the protection from an infectious disease. If you are immune to a disease, you can be exposed to it without becoming infected. This so-called COVID-19 vaccine does not provide any individual who receives the vaccine with immunity to COVID-19, nor does it prevent the spread of the disease. It does not meet the CDC's own definition of a vaccine. That's why it's a deceptive trade practice under 15 U.S. Code Section 41 of the Federal Trade Commission for pharmaceutical companies who are producing this experimental gene therapy to claim that it's a vaccine. These pharmaceutical companies are lying to the public. The government health bureaucrats are also lying to the public by calling this treatment a vaccine. This COVID-19 experimental gene therapy is only designed to minimize your symptoms if you were to be infected with the COVID-19 virus. Let me re-emphasize that this COVID-19 experimental gene therapy does not meet the CDC's own definition of what a vaccine is. It does not provide immunity or prevent the spread of the disease. By referring to this therapy as a vaccine, the pharmaceutical companies are attempting to shield themselves because vaccine injuries or deaths are exempted by law from any product liability lawsuits. The United States health bureaucrats initiated Operation Warp Speed to fast-track the so-called COVID-19 vaccine. On December 11, 2020, the FDA approved the Pfizer vaccine, and Moderna's vaccine was approved just a week later. Now, these so-called vaccines were approved without any published animal studies and without any long-term human studies. This means that individuals who get these so-called experimental gene therapy vaccine treatments are the guinea pigs. That's right. Humans will be the guinea pigs. These so-called vaccines, which are manufactured using cells derived from human babies that were aborted in the 1970s, should more accurately be called experimental gene therapy. They are untested, unproven experimental gene therapy that poses a much greater danger and risk to your health than the COVID-19. Moderna is a pharmaceutical company, a biotech company located in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It was founded in 2010 as Mode RNA Therapeutics. That's where they got the word Moderna. It has been developing experimental gene therapy using synthetic mRNA for the treatment of various diseases, including the COVID-19. Now, this is really important to note. Over the last 10 years, Moderna has never successfully developed any product for treatment of any disease prior to this. An experimental gene therapy using synthetic mRNA to treat an infectious disease has never been attempted in humans. Why? Because of its failure in previous animal studies. The theory behind conventional vaccines is to inject a small amount of the infecting virus or the bacterial protein into your body, which in turn will cause your immune system to produce antibodies to that infecting organism and provide you with immunity. The new COVID-19 so-called vaccine is not a vaccine at all. It's a synthetic messenger ribonucleic acid called mRNA. It's experimental gene therapy, and it works much differently than historic vaccines. The theory behind this is that when this synthetic mRNA is injected into your body, that it inserts itself into your cells. And now it begins to produce the coronavirus spike proteins. That's right. Your own cells now will have this synthetic mRNA that you didn't even make from your DNA that's been impressed into your cells. It's now going to make the spike protein of the coronavirus. Why would you want to do that? If you're perfectly healthy, why would you want to inject a foreign mRNA into your body? Well, what is expected to have happen is that, well, your body will start producing antibodies to this coronavirus protein made by your own cells. There's no way to know how long your cells will produce these viral proteins or if they'll ever stop producing them. Your immune system will be hypercharged because it's having to fight off all these viral proteins that your own body's making all the time. And it will overreact when exposed to any type of coronavirus in the future. This is what happened when mRNA experimental gene therapy was used in testing other types of coronaviruses in animals back in 2005 and again in 2012. The animals died from an immune system hyperreaction when they were later exposed to the coronavirus against which they had been previously vaccinated. This hyperreaction is called an antibody enhancement reaction. Because these are the first mRNA vaccines ever used in humans, you would think that they would have first been tested and proven safe in published animal studies and have at least 2 years of human testing, which are routinely required for a vaccine. Instead, the COVID mRNA so-called vaccine was only tested on humans for a couple of months. Wouldn't it have been prudent to have a long-term human study before recommending mass vaccination of the entire population? Adverse effects are inevitable. In the first month of use, there were more than 40,000 documented adverse reactions in the United States, including thousands of cases of anaphylactic shock and serious neurological problems. Because less than 10% of adverse effects are routinely reported to the vaccination board, hundreds of thousands of incidences and damages from the injection have likely occurred. That is only in the first 30 days. As of February 14th, there were also 934 deaths of individuals who had received this experimental gene therapy so-called vaccine, including baseball great Hank Aaron. I know several individuals that took this vaccine, unbeknownst to me, that have died within 2 days. That's no coincidence. Even more worrisome are delayed and long-term adverse effects of this experimental gene therapy. The synthetic mRNA experimental gene therapy turns on the production of COVID-19 proteins, but it has no off switch. It just keeps on replicating, and the immune system keeps on mounting an immune response against it. That is why some researchers are concerned that it's going to provoke autoimmune reactions, setting you up for a lifetime of serious inflammatory disease. Another major concern is the possibility that COVID-19 experimental gene therapy can make infections even worse. There's a convincing argument that this experimental gene therapy may trigger an antibody-dependent enhancement reaction. that increases the virus's ability to infect your cells. In other words, if you come down with a coronavirus infection in the future after receiving your experimental gene therapy injections, then you may have a much worse case than if you'd never had this therapy in the first place. That's when the treatment is worse than the disease. And that's what it looks like this experimental gene therapy is. Many experts are predicting a surge of life-threatening infections, inflammatory disorders, and deaths coming in months and years for those who have received this treatment. Of course, the blame will be placed on a mutant virulent strain of COVID-19 virus rather than on poorly tested experimental gene therapy. And then they'll want to do mandatory vaccinations of everybody. Even if it were acknowledged, the U.S. government, which has spent over $12 billion on COVID-19 vaccines so far, would foot the bill for any damages incurred by those who receive the treatment. As I previously mentioned, by law, pharmaceutical companies cannot be sued for any injury caused by any vaccine. So by lying and calling this experimental gene therapy a vaccine, they are reaping enormous profits with no down risk of product liability. Not only is the media downplaying the COVID-19 gene therapy side effects, but they seem content to simply repeat the drug makers' overly optimistic claims of efficacy. You've probably heard that both Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are 95% effective. This is a false claim. It's a lie. Yet the medical establishment and the government bureaucrats have simply taken these pharmaceutical companies' word for it and are encouraging everyone to line up for this experimental gene therapy so-called vaccine. At the time the Pfizer and Moderna products were approved, these pharmaceutical companies had failed to release most of the raw data from their experimental trials. In fact, they are still withholding much of it. However, now that more of it is available for review, a different picture has emerged. In the British Medical Journal, Associate Editor Dr. Peter Doshi had the opportunity to review the available data. And he pointed out the inconsistencies and the weaknesses of the pre-approval trials. He concluded that rather than the widely publicized 95% effective rate, these so-called vaccines are at best only 19% effective. At this low rate, they would have never been approved. There are still many unknowns about this experimental gene therapy. There is no indication that it saves any lives or prevents the spreading of the infection or you're contracting the infection, which is why health bureaucrats continue to recommend masking and social distancing even after you've received these injections. Nobody has any idea about the long-term adverse effects of this experimental gene therapy. Yet they are still plowing ahead with plans to inject this experimental gene therapy into the entire population. This experimental gene therapy will not eradicate the coronavirus that causes COVID-19 any more than the flu vaccine has eliminated the flu. COVID-19 is here to stay, even without this so-called vaccine. Infections will slow as more people develop natural herd immunity. Why in the world would you risk all the known and unknown short-term and long-term side effects of an experimental gene therapy that was inadequately tested, rushed through the approval process at warp speed, and found to be much less effective, yet more dangerous than initially promised, and more dangerous than the COVID infection itself? I'm advising my family, my friends, and my guests here at the Hotsy Health and Wellness Center to just say no. No, I am not going to take this experimental gene therapy vaccine. COVID-19 infections pose no significant health risk except to those that are infirm and elderly, and those with severe pre-existing conditions, not unlike the flu or any other respiratory infection. Most individuals who contract COVID-19 have mild or moderate symptoms for a few days, similar to the flu, and the overall survival rate of those who are infected is 99.98%. It's very seldomly lethal, except in those that are infirm and elderly and have pre-existing health conditions. It has been demonstrated in studies around the world that the use of ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine can safely prevent and treat the COVID-19 infection. Of course, it's important for you to strengthen your immune system with vitamin and mineral supplementation, healthy eating, natural hormone replenishment, treatment of allergies, exercise, and a good night's sleep, and maintaining your ideal body weight. Aside from that, let's allow this virus to just run its course in society so that we can develop herd immunity, which is far safer and much more effective than this experimental gene therapy could ever be. The panic and mass hysteria created by government health bureaucrats, by the media, and politicians is all about control, power, and money. I've written extensively about the ineffectiveness and dangers of wearing masks, of social distancing, of closing businesses, and lockdowns. We need to get back to work, back to school, and back to church. I'm Dr. Steve Hotsy, and I thank you for joining me, and I want to encourage you to pass this video on to your family members, friends, and associates, and your entire list of people with whom you're in contact, to warn them about the dangers of this experimental gene therapy program that's being foisted upon the public. You can also send them a copy of my document that I've written about this particular experimental gene therapy. And I want to encourage you to just say no. Thanks so much for allowing me to join you today, and I wish you every success in your health life and in your personal life. This is Dr. Hotsy saying thank you.